beautiful woman to my left is my wife, who I've been married to now for 12 years. And our youngest son, Henry, have joined us on this visit as well. So I wanted to introduce them. Can you guys wave? Can you wave, Henry? Yeah. Amy and I were here in February we got to be here for part of Charo Days and to do the Hands Across the Border event. How many of you have been to Hands Across the Border? 5 of us have been to Hands Across the Border. We want to steal the idea from you in El Paso and connect with Ciudad Juarez because I love the idea of Brownsville and Matamoros celebrating those things that unite these two communities, that make us stronger, that make us safer, that make us more successful. Literally seeing these beautiful children from Matamoros, these beautiful children from Brownsville, exchanging gifts, holding hands, leaders from both sides of the border, embracing, welcoming each other, defying the stereotype and the conventional wisdom that the border is a place for us to be scared of, that it's a place where we need to build walls to separate ourselves from each other, that somehow Mexicans, Mexican nationals, Mexican immigrants, maybe even Mexican Americans are something that this country has to be scared or paranoid about. The story of Brownsville and Matamoros, the story of El Paso and Ciudad Juarez, the story of the US-Mexico border is so positive, is so strong, is so good, is something that all of us need to do a much better job of sharing with each other, our families, our friends, our neighbors, and the rest of the country. It is the antidote to the paranoia and the anxiety and even the hatred and racism that flow from that cause us in the House of Representatives just on Friday to vote to spend $1.6 billion of your dollars to build more walls to separate us from Mexico. And thank God there are no other competing priorities in this country that need money and that we can just blow $1.6 billion, which by the way is just a down payment on the $20 to $25 billion, that 2,000 mile all concrete wall, now with solar panels and a little window so that when they're throwing the 60-pound drug load over the top, it doesn't hit you on the head. I don't know if anybody caught that. President Trump is looking out for you, okay? Don't forget that. Thank God that we don't need to invest in education and back in our public school teachers. Thank God we don't need more jobs that pay better, with better working conditions and better training and certifications for the people who are looking for work. Thank God that we don't need to spend money on the environment, cleaning up our air, our water, so that each one of our kids can trust the water that's coming out of the tap. Don't you think those are bigger, more important priorities than building a wall between the United States and Mexico? It makes absolutely no sense. It's the rhetoric of Donald Trump and those who you can almost forgive, don't know the border, don't live here, don't understand it the way that we do, versus the facts. The fact that last year we had fewer apprehensions along the US-Mexico border than we've had in almost my entire 44 years of being alive. It was somewhere just over 400,000 compared to the first year of the Bush presidency, 1.6 million apprehensions. We're at a quarter of where we were. And you know that so many of those that we were apprehending, who were not trying to flee from the men and women in green, our Border Patrol agents, or the men and women in blue, our customs officers, were children and young mothers and families fleeing horrific violence in El Salvador, in Guatemala, in Honduras, coming to this country to seek shelter, to do better for themselves and their kids, absolutely, but also to contribute to this country and to the American dream the way that immigrants and refugees and asylum seekers have been doing for decades and now centuries in this country. Part of the story of our success. We need to share that, right? This campaign to take back Texas is also a campaign to take back the leadership that we used to be able to provide to the rest of the country. We, of all states in the Union, whose success is in part defined by our connection with Mexico and the rest of the world, whether you measure it in trade, Whether you measure it in immigration, whether you measure it in the fact that El Paso is one of the safest cities in the country, not in spite of, but because 25% of those that I represent were born somewhere else, most of them in Mexico, and that we are connected at the hip with Ciudad Juarez. This state, we, the people here today at the Zocolo, we should be writing comprehensive immigration reform law. We should be leading on this issue that we understand better than anybody else. Here are the upsides. We know that immigrants make us safer. I talked about El Paso being one of the safest cities, in part due to the number of immigrants who live there. We know that immigrants, and whatever the rhetoric to the contrary, the facts bear out, immigrants commit crimes at a lower rate than native-born Americans. We know that immigrants start the businesses, create the art, bring the culture, add to the conversation, make the American fabric a little bit richer and more interesting and more exciting and more dynamic and a little bit younger. And all of those are great things economically, culturally, historically, as we continue to be the greatest nation this globe has ever known. But there's another side to this story if we don't act. Not only are we going to blow billions of dollars on a wall that we don't need, not only are we going to take our eye off of where those threats really exist. Someone in Corpus Christi last night said, "Hey Beto, I think you're all wrong about spending money on this wall. I think we need to spend it. I just think that the wall needs to be with Canada. And we need to keep out those dangerous Canadians from invading the country." It makes just as much sense as building a wall with Mexico, which is to say that it's ridiculous. But not only are we taking our eye off the real threats, and we do have threats to this country that we need to be putting resources, money, law enforcement focus, and attention on, but we're also contributing to deaths and to people who are losing their lives trying to come into this country. Who saw the story, the tragic story a week ago, last Sunday? Immigrants found baking in the back of a tractor trailer rig in a parking lot in a Walmart in San Antonio, Texas. That's just absolutely tragic, heartbreaking. People fleeing terrible conditions, coming to a better place, reuniting with family, working the toughest jobs that most Americans won't work, and dying, literally dying to get here because our laws don't match our values, don't match our needs, don't match our traditions, don't match our heritage right now, because we don't have the leadership in the Senate that we need to bring about this change that's good for this country and that's going to save lives throughout the U.S.-Mexico border. In El Paso, 3 days later, they find 4 bodies in the canal that connects El Paso with Ciudad Juarez at the Rio Grande forms right there. Kids, 14-year-old, 16-year-old, dying to come to this country. To do us harm, to kill us, to rape us, to get us? Absolutely not. To work, to get ahead, to contribute, to make us stronger, to make us better? Yes, that's what they were coming to do. 7,000 people, 7,000 human beings, 7,000 lives, 7,000 souls lost in the last 20 years trying to come into the United States, trying to come into Texas, trying to join family, trying to do what so many of our ancestors did, and what helps explain the beautiful people who are here today. That's what we're losing out on. So look, if you're like me, you're here right now, and I don't want to just presume. I mean, you could have just been eating lunch here, having a beer, and then I walked in with a microphone. But I think you're here right now because you recognize that everything is on the line for this country. It's the things that we want to stop, right? It's this stupid wall. It's this Muslim ban. It's this mocking and making fun of people who are different than the majority of Americans. It's telling transgender service members, your service is no longer required in this country, even though you've put your life on the line, you've sacrificed, you've done everything that we've asked you to do. We're going to highlight this difference, make you feel bad or ashamed, or at least try to do that, and through that, score some points politically. We're going to call the press the enemy of the people. We're going to work with the government of Russia at the same time that we belittle and vilify the government of Mexico. We're going to fire people who are trying to get to the bottom of serious open questions about how far the Russians got into our democracy in the 2016 election and how that contributed to a massive change that we've seen in our trust and our ability to depend on our institutions, including the ballot box. Those are the things that may bring you out, but it may also be the positive things that you want to achieve. You want to make sure that every single Texan who's looking for work, who wants to find a job, who maybe had one before the recession, can't find one today, is connected to the certification, the training, the education, maybe that apprenticeship that's going to allow him or her to excel, to be productive, to put food on the table, to pay the rent. You want to make sure that every single one of us can see a doctor whenever we need to, not just at the point of crisis, not just when we get rolled into the ER, but before those things happen, so that we can get back on our feet, so that we can take care of our families, so that we can finish school, so that we can provide for others in our community. When healthcare is no longer a privilege or a function of how much you earn, or where you were born, or where you work, or to whom you were born, but instead is treated as a human right, this state is going to be stronger. This country is going to be stronger, and we're all going to be better. Let me know if you're for universal health care. Let me know if you think that's something that everybody in this state, in this country deserves. That's something that we can achieve together. I mean, listen, kudos to you, and it only goes to you and others like you, who lit up the phone lines, burned down the internet, destroyed the fax machines with the pressure that you placed on the Senate and the House to stop the repeal of the Affordable Care Act. That happened because of your pressure and what you did, and backing up those courageous senators who did the right thing at literally the 11th hour. But that's not enough. It's not enough anymore to stop the bad things. And believe me, there are a lot of bad things that we've got to stop. It's also about organizing around the great things that we want to do. And so we've talked about healthcare, we've talked about jobs, we've talked about writing the laws that will define immigration reform. And this gentleman who stopped me as I came in said, I want to make sure that you're not going to forget our veterans. Let me tell you a story. I serve on the House Veterans Affairs Committee, and we are wrestling with one of the most critical issues in this country that is never talked about, because you don't have the PACs or the special interests or the corporations or the mega donors focused on that, and so most politicians aren't. But you have a suicide crisis amongst veterans in this country today. Those women and men who put their lives on the line, who've served in Afghanistan and Iraq and Syria and Yemen and Libya and now Somalia once again, who served in Vietnam, who served in Korea, and yes, those veterans who are still with us who served in World War II. We made a bargain with them, a deal. You enlist, or maybe you were drafted, and we're going to make sure that we take care of your education, your access to a good job, your ability to get back on your feet if you're homeless, and the opportunity to see a doctor, a provider, or a specialist if you need to go to the VA. There are too many veterans who are waiting too long to get into VAs, and functionally, those wait times become denial of service, and at a minimum, they're suffering, and at worst, we're losing them. And there's a group of veterans among them, those veterans who have bad paper discharges. You had post-traumatic stress disorder, traumatic brain injury, military sexual trauma as part of your service incurred while you were doing what we asked you to do for this country. And it may be connected to why you have an other than honorable discharge. And as you get on the outside, as you become a civilian, you no longer have access to the VA at all. So it's not a function of long wait times. You just can't get in the door to see that psychiatrist or psychologist who may be the person that saves your life. Tens of thousands of veterans with an other than honorable discharge who are taking their own lives at 2 times the rate of other veterans in this country. We wrote a bill and worked with Republicans on the other side of the aisle in the House Veterans Affairs Committee to extend VA access for mental health care specialties to those veterans. Republicans, Democrats saw the wisdom of this. It passed unanimously. It's moving towards the floor of the House. That's what happens when we don't accept the dysfunction, the BS, the partisanship, where we're not any longer putting party and ideology above country and service in our constituents and those that we were sworn to serve in these positions of public trust. That's what I want to do for you and every person in the state of Texas going forward in the U.S. Senate. That's why we don't take a dime of political action committee money. These massive donations made by PACs, by entities, not people, that flow into political campaigns that help explain how the greatest power on the planet, the wealthiest democracy the world has ever known, is in such major dysfunction today. You can't pass a budget, you can't fund the government, you jump from one fiscal crisis to the next. You've been at war in the Middle East for 26 years straight. I was a high school senior, I'm 44 years old today, I was a high school senior, and I remember listening to George H.W. Bush explain why we were going to use military force in Iraq. And guess what? 26 years later, we are in Iraq today with no end in sight, but there's more. We're in Afghanistan, we're in Syria, we deposed the leadership of Libya. We're now at war under the 2001 authorization for the use of military force in Somalia and Yemen as well. When are these wars going to stop? When are we going to get a handle on the most important life or death issues for this country, for the people who are putting their lives on the line? It's not going to happen until our democracy works again, until it reflects the people that we serve, until we're serving people and not corporations. So no PACs, no PACs, term limits for every one of us in the House and Senate. Do your job and get the hell out of the way afterwards,
yeah,
right?
Woo!
No reason for you to stay decade upon decade upon decade. Where is the urgency and the political will when you know that if you don't get it done this year, you can get it done next year or maybe a decade or two from now? We need to make sure that we have faith in each other. So if I have faith in you, and I'm asking you to send me to the United States Senate, I need to, by return, say, there's nothing so special about me that somebody here today at Zocolo in Brownsville, Texas, can't replace me in 6 years or in 12 years max and do just as good or perhaps, and maybe more likely, a better job than I've been able to do. I have faith in you, so I subscribe to term limits. I introduced legislation to ensure that we have term limits, and I'm holding myself voluntarily to term limits. That's faith in Texas, that's faith in Brownsville. And then I'm gonna lay down a radical concept on you. Right now, we have the most gerrymandered state in the union. 36 congressional districts, and almost not a single one of them competitive until this year. And actually, there are a lot of them that are gonna be competitive because of the spirit that's animating this meeting today in Brownsville is happening all over the state. But traditionally, of those 36, there's been one, because we've had members of Congress choosing their voters instead of voters choosing their members of Congress. So how about this? A nonpartisan, meaning no politicians invited, rational, logical redistricting commission that can do a much better job than we're doing right now, maybe as good a job as my 6-year-old Henry could do in drawing congressional districts, but one that makes sure that people feel that their voice and their vote really counts. We are not a red state, we are not a blue state, we are a state that doesn't vote. People have drawn the conclusion, and I don't blame them for doing so, because the courts have found that our state legislature has literally drawn people out of their districts based on their race and their ethnicity. And they've mandated that we change those districts to reflect some basic level of democracy. I think that people have drawn the conclusion that their votes don't count, that they can't make a difference. We need to prove them wrong. Even before we fix gerrymandering, we need to prove them wrong by electing the first Democrat to the U.S. Senate in what will be 30 years.
Yeah.
And starting right now, this year, in 2017, in Brownsville, Texas. I mean, if you think about it, this shouldn't be happening. We shouldn't all be getting together today. O'Rourke shouldn't be sweating in South Texas, in the Rio Grande Valley, 15, 16 months before an election. You shouldn't have taken some time out of your Sunday this far away from when we're going to decide the future of this state and this country. But you on your own, without any party bosses, without any candidate, without anyone telling you what to do, decided that you weren't going to sit on the sidelines. You weren't going to let this one pass you by. You were going to have a great answer for yourself, for your conscience, for your kids, for your grandkids, for the future, about what you did for this country when everything was on the line. And you made a decision that we're going to organize together. We're going to register people to vote. We're going to block walk and canvass. We're going to put Beto O'Rourke on the ballot. I need 5,000 signatures. Can I get them from the people in this room? Will you all make a commitment early on to show the people of Texas that we together, going door to door, talking to our friends, our family, our neighbors, the folks that we work with, we can put enough names on a ballot petition to get the future U.S. Senator from El Paso, Texas, on the ballot so that we can vote for him in 2018. Will you do that with me? So, if you signed in on your way in, we've got your email address and we'll get in touch with you and we'll ask you if you really want to do this. If you haven't signed in, you can text my name, Beto, to 90975. 90975, you text Beto, we'll sign you up. That way we'll stay in touch with you. Lastly, when is the last town hall that Ted Cruz held at the Zocolo? Can anybody tell me? I'm here and never. I want to make sure that I have a chance to answer some of your questions, hear what's on your mind. You've taken the time to come out and listen to me, for which I am grateful. I want to make sure that I'm taking the time to listen to you and what's on your mind. I want to make sure that what you have to say informs how I campaign and, if elected, how I serve you. And so as I conclude and then turn the floor over to you, let me say this. It is an incredible honor to serve in Congress right now, to be able to make a difference in some small way, to support our service members, to help our veterans, to stand up for the U.S.-Mexico border, to dispel some of the stereotypes and negative myths that have seemed to define us for far too long and are turning into bad policy. But if we want to do better for all of us, if we want to build on what we're doing here in Brownsville with the excellent representation of Philemon Vela, let's hear it for Phil Vela. Good friend, fellow advocate for the border. With Phil Vela and so many other great people in Congress, if we want to build on that and actually get some of these really big things done, we're going to have to do something really big. And winning the state of Texas, and winning back the Senate, and bringing some balance and a check on a presidency that's out of control to your national government, that's something big that we can all do together. So, are you all in?
Yeah!
You ready to do this? Thanks for taking some time to be with us today. Let me hear what's on your mind. If you raise your hand, I'll recognize you. And